start your macrame coaster, you're going to take your wooden dowel and all 12 of your cords, fold the cords in half and attach them to the dowel using lark's head knots. You're going to start by attaching 2 of your main colour cords. So take the first one and fold that in half. You should have this loop at the top. Lay that over your dowel and then bring the loop behind the dowel and pull the ends of the cord through the loop. Once you've pulled those through, just push that knot so that it's nice and tight, and that's your first lark's head knot. You're now going to take a second cord of your main colour and you're going to repeat that step. Now push those lark's head knots together to the left end of your dowel and take the first of your accent colour cords. Lay that cord over the dowel and tie a lark's head knot. Then follow this with the second of your accent colour cords. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and add the rest of your main colour cords. Now just tighten the knots by pulling the ends until everything lays neatly in a row. Now I'm going to move all of the cords into the centre of the dowel so that I have space to secure the dowel in place. It's much easier to tie the rest of the knots if you can keep everything from moving around when you pull the cords. To secure it, you have a few options. You could use a clipboard and prop this up on a cushion if you're working on your lap. If you prefer to stand, you could use a rail such as the one in your wardrobe and a couple of S-hooks to hang the coaster. For this video, I'm going to use sellotape and stick it to the table. We're now going to tie a row of square knots around 1 centimetre or 1 finger's width below the lark's head knots. To tie a square knot, take the first 4 cords on the left and separate them into a most left cord, 2 in the centre and 1 on the right. Lay the most left cord over the centre cords horizontally, forming the shape of a number 4 with a long tail. Take the right cord over the top of the tail and then behind the centre cords and up through the loop on the left. Now pull these cords tight, but not up to the top of the project. Here I've pulled it too high and this is wrong. If this happens, just loosen the knot like this and tidy it back up by gently tugging the ends and holding the centre cords still. By holding the centre cords and gently pulling the knot ends, you can carefully adjust the height of your square knot. Now to finish the square knot, take the most right cord and loop this over the centre cords horizontally, making a backwards 4 with a long tail. Now take the most left cord and lay that over the tail, and then pull that behind the centre cords and up through the loop created on the right. Now pull the ends to tighten this and bring this right underneath the first half of the knot. Now move on to the next 4 cords along and tie another square knot. Now this knot needs to be the same height as the knot you just tied, so when you tighten it, lay the first knot straight and use that as your guide like this. See how they're at the same height? So now go ahead and finish this square knot. Okay, so you can now go ahead and tie another 4 square knots on this row, making sure that they all end up the same height to create one straight row of 6 square knots. The next row will be a row of 5 square knots, and each of these knots will join together the 2 above it. To start, take the most left square knot and move the 2 most left cords out of the way. You won't be using these. Now get the next 2 cords from the next knot along. You now have the 4 cords that you'll tie this square knot with. Tie this square knot the same as the previous ones, except this time when you tighten the knot you can bring it right up underneath the previous row. Okay, so you can see that this has joined together the 2 knots above it. Now continue along this row, and when you reach the end, you should have 2 cords left unused. That will be these 2, so you'll have 2 spare at each end of the coaster. You're now going to continue tying rows of square knots, each time alternating whether the row has 6 or 5 knots. For the next one, we start right at the beginning using all of the cords again, and this is going to be a row of 6. When you start a row of 6 knots, be careful not to pull too tight. Okay, it should look like this with a little loop on the edge. Now if you pull that too tight, the knot's going to go diagonal and that closes the loop. If you do this, your coaster is going to end up looking all wibbly wobbly, okay? So keep that end knot loose on the left, but on the right hand side of the knot you can see it butts up to the knot above it. Okay, so you just want to make sure we've got those loops down the left hand side, and there'll also be loops down the right hand side as well. Okay, so I'm going to finish tying this row, and then I'm going to do the other rows off camera. Just keep tying rows alternating between 5 and 6 knots per row until you have a total of 13 rows. To double check your row count, count the solid coloured knots down the edge. There should be 7. Now you can remove the dowel from the top of your coaster and smooth out these cords to remove the lark's head knots. And this should leave a row of loops all along the top. If you now take a pair of scissors, we're going to cut these loops right at the top of each one, and that'll create a long fringe effect. Now tidy up the fringe on the other end so that it's easier to work with, because you'll have lots of different length cords currently. So we're going to leave the fringe quite long for now. Just make sure that everything is roughly the same length. Okay, so you can see I'm just chopping off the really long bits, just making this a bit tidier, a bit easier to work with. We're now going to make the fringe the right length and the same length on both sides. So to do this, fold your coaster in half and line up the knots on each end and lay out all of the fringe, making sure it's laid flat. Okay, so if you lift it up, you can just make sure that you've got those knots lined up evenly so that you've folded directly in the centre. You're now going to take your scissors and cut across this fringe in a straight line at roughly the length you'd like your final fringe to be. I leave mine around 2 to 3 centimetres. If you miss any cords here, which you will notice I do, you can just go back and cut them once you reach the end. Now when you unfold your coaster, you should have matching length fringe on each end. We're now going to make this fringe nice and fluffy. So to do this, you're going to take a brush. This could either be a specific macrame brush, I got mine from Woolly Whatnot, or you could use a pet brush with metal bristles, or just a regular comb, and you're just going to start brushing your fringe, and that's going to gradually loosen up and turn lovely and fluffy. You'll probably find that your ends look a bit uneven and messy once you've done this. So if you just come back in with the scissors, you can tidy this up and cut a nice straight line across the edge there. So I'm going to finish brushing out my fringe off camera, but if you repeat these steps on the fringe at the other side and get that brushed out, you'll have a lovely fluffy finished macrame coaster.